Oh. Hariom, and greetings from Niagara Falls. I was listening to an interview with Adam McKay, who is the director of a popular movie called Don't Look Up. How many of you have seen this? Okay. Don't Look Up, I'm sure you have figured out, is a movie about climate change. The director uses the symbolism of an asteroid for climate change. Why an asteroid? Because all we know about space, it feels like an asteroid is moving slowly. Does an asteroid move slowly? It's moving extremely rapidly, too fast for us to comprehend. Isn't climate change the same way? Yeah, the summers are getting a little bit hotter. Yeah, that state has a little bit less water. But this is moving fast. He also uses an asteroid because any asteroid that will hit the Earth, this will be a direct hit, correct? If an asteroid hits Australia, that's still going to be a direct hit on Europe and on South America. A very intelligent comparison that he directs. Many of us are immersed in the study of Vedanta. This is the science of knowing oneself, the science of joy. And why we don't feel we know ourselves or joy is because of avidya. How many of you have heard of this term before? Avidya. Tell me what it means in the chat. Tell me what it means in English. Forgetting, that's a good definition. Ignorance is a technical definition. The most practical definition that I feel, it is taking for granted. Avidya, I'm taking for granted who I am. I'm taking for granted what the source of joy is. We all have avidya towards our environment. Taking this for granted. I clean a lot in our home. Most of it is not my mess. And so while I clean, I listen a lot to podcasts and interviews. And another report I was listening to is about climate migration. Have you ever heard of this, climate migration? Because of climate change, it is forcing humans to migrate. But who can't migrate? Think practically. Who is the last group of people to leave an area where climate change is devastating that area? Can you share with me in the chat? What kind of people? Yes, those who are most vulnerable, those with minimal resources. I've just come back from a soccer game, and that's why I'm out of breath. And this out of breath will go away. It is a luxury that I get to play soccer. But imagine people who are living in an area with extreme air pollution, and they don't have the privilege I have of being able for that obstacle to go away. My obstacle is rest a little bit. For them, what do they do? And that's why a new field, it's a contemporary field, it's happened in our lifetime, is environmental justice. We have all sorts of justice, social justice and financial justice, political justice, environmental justice. to help those who are vulnerable. And many of you thoughtfully shared, animals also can't migrate to a certain extent, correct? Plants definitely can't migrate. If there's a forest fire, what do the trees do? They just surrender to their injury. They die. Environmental justice is a lovely form of ahimsa. Ahimsa in English means sensitivity. There is a wrong sensitivity that many people in society have. That sensitivity is taking everything personally. None of you have that wrong sensitivity. You don't. The right sensitivity is to be a long-term thinker. And if you're a long-term thinker, you will be part of this community. This is a sangha, a community that's focused on seva. Seva means to give. To what? Or better is to whom? Prthvi. Our environment, our home, our mother. Our means, it doesn't matter if you can spell our or not, it's still yours, correct? So Prthvi Sevasanga is a workshop to develop the right sensitivity. And so I welcome all of you to a special workshop today, tomorrow, Tuesday, and Wednesday for 4 evenings. And if you keep thinking about this, that's 100 hours. For 100 hours, we are going to reflect on our Shastra, on our environment. Our environment is very black and white. We can all relate to that. But why our Shastra? Because how people are living with their environment, it was not always like this. This is a new form of aggressive behavior, very much about the industrial evolution and the present. Many of us, at least historically, know about the Ramayana. And when Sri Rama wanted to use the ocean, and use it means only to contact it, to be able to travel from Bharat, that is India, to Lanka, now Sri Lanka. What did he do before he put his first toe into the ocean? Can you all share with me in the chat? What did he do? They had a big party, beach party. He prayed. He asked for permission. And further details are, he took very potent plants and put them into the ocean, like an offering from nature to nature. And the ocean was grateful for such sensitivity. And when Sri Rama and all of nature was traveling with him, even the nature and the oceans came to support him, to greet him. That's precedent. And that's, we're going to remember from our Shastras how we are to live in harmony with our environment. This is our second workshop. It is now the second month of 2022. And we follow a format of LEST. LEST stands for Vivek likes acronyms. He can't get enough of acronyms. LEST stands for learn, engage, support, and transform. I want to focus on the ST before we begin our workshop in a more active way. Support. We all need support in different ways, but I feel the most vulnerable personality in this multiverse right now is our mother, is our earth. And when someone needs support, those who are privileged like us, what should we do? Give. Tan man dhan, sab kuch tera. I offer my body, my mind, my resources. Today, our community has begun to fundraise for our second environmental cause. Our first one, the Environmental Defense Fund. All of us raised more than $25,000 in 108 hours. That is epic fundraising because we're developing the right sensitivity. Now, just as Pujya Swami Chinmaya has shared, a love that doesn't grow is not love. A giving that does not continue is not giving, which is why we're now taking up our second environmental cause. And when we complete this, I'm going to introduce 3, 4, and 5, and at the end of the year, 6. So our second environmental cause, I will share in a simple way because this is on our website. It will be shared in the chat and so on. It is a special organization facilitating a special school, which is cool, that is teaching students how to be environmentally friendly. A lot of us, maybe our habits are too deep that we can't be environmentally friendly, but we can support those to be environmentally friendly, correct? What one generation can give to the next generation is to sustain themselves. This is why Sheila and I work hard to educate our children. Whether they're getting educated is not in our control, but we try so that they can sustain themselves. My aspiration, as I was reflecting on our workshop, if you look at the number of participants, there's 87 cameras. There's multiple seekers in some cameras. So let's fast forward this to 100. If every one of us gave $100 right now, I'm giving you permission to ignore me. Vivekji, we don't need your permission. If all of us did this, then we would raise $10,008 in 1 minute. Is that difficult to do? If you think it's difficult, remember the privilege example I shared about me being out of breath. My breath is already coming back, but imagine those living in Shanghai, in Delhi, in Qatar, where it's just too hot, as an example. T stands for transform. And this leads me to who will be facilitating our workshop for February. That is tonight. She's starting. I will continue the next 3 days. We start with the best, and we continue with the rest. That is Himali Basha. Himali is a corporate sustainability professional at Deloitte. She is passionate about addressing climate change through the power of industry, which is so lovely that she's in an environment where she can affect change. Prayer works, but being a professional also works. She has an MBA from the Kellogg School of Management at Northwestern. This is in Chicago. In her free time, and as I continue to read this, she is happily married, okay? I will continue reading her biodata, but I'm prefacing this with she is happily married. I know her husband, I know their whole family. She enjoys training for triathlons and is an avid scuba diver. She's also a yatri. She had joined me in our yatra to Sri Lanka. It's awesome that I was just referencing that. And Himali and I got to be there together. So I'm inviting Himali to share her training, her professionalism on Climate Change 101. And just to address the point being shared in the chat, Rupa is related to Himali tonight, not the other way around, okay? Tonight is Himali's night. Himali, thank you for being who you are and thank you for sharing with us. Please lead us.
Thank you, Vivekji, and Hari Om, everyone. So grateful to be here and to speak with you all today about climate change and answer any questions that you have. I'm going to start with a video and end with a video, and then we'll have lots of discussion as well throughout. So I'm going to share my screen and get started.
Did you know that half of the Great Barrier Reef is now gone? 150 living species extinct every day. Gone. 40 football fields of trees. Every minute. Gone. Going. Going. Gone. How beautiful is our home? A planet full of biodiversity until we turned the thermostat too hot, and now the world is burning like fires blazing in California, Siberia, Australia, and the Amazon. The natural world is fighting back. Storms, tornadoes, so many hurricanes that we don't have enough names to keep track. While China and India flood like violent hiccups, like the tears of a planet in angry disarray. Look at what we've done to our home. Home is where the heart is. Home is where we feel at ease, where we are nurtured to reach our potential, but we've taken it for granted, becoming reckless and wasteful. We're standing on a knife's edge, with one foot off the ledge. Our history is made up of moments like this. Moments and times that will define us. And the time to stand up and heal our wounded world is now. Quivering and broken, choking on carbon and tears of oil. Our planet is fractured and begging for us to just stop. It's time to close the gulf between knowledge and action. We need to turn back the dial. It's now or never. Going, going, going. Let's get going.
How does that make everyone feel? It's a very emotional spoken word poem. And as you sort of referenced, this video was created through my employer as part of an employee training that we're doing. But I just thought it was so powerful that I wanted to share it with you all. So I wanted to talk to you about climate change and around why it matters and why you should care. For the things that we should be concerned about, but the things that we should also have optimism for, and how we can actually do something about it. And we'll start with a couple of questions, and I'm about to test your knowledge around climate change. And we're going to use the annotate feature on Zoom. So for those who are not familiar, I'll ask you to do a quick test run. If you go to the top bar and select, you can usually select view options and annotate at the top. And then you can even just test out the stamp and the text feature. And if you want to format your text size or font, you can do that using the format. Great, it already looks like people are trying it out. Give people a couple seconds to get it. Awesome. All right. So with that, I'm going to clear and we're going to move on. All right. So the first question is around climate change. What is climate change? Is it one, when the long-term weather conditions shift during a specific time of year in a specific location? Two, part of the natural cycle of global warming and cooling of the planet. Three, the sun's varying intensity of energy over time. So I'll ask you to put a stamp next to the question that you think, the answer that you think is correct. Excellent. It looks like the vast majority of you have it right. The answer is the long-term weather conditions shift that during a specific period of time in a specific location. Climate change is about this long-term shift. While there is a natural cycle of warming and cooling of the planet, this is an unprecedented warming and cooling, and you'll see that in some of the graphs coming up. We'll move to the next question. This is a true or false question. Nearly 100% of scientists agree that climate change is real and caused by humans. They'll ask you to stamp. And for those of you who are having trouble with annotation, you can also just put it in the chat. And again, it looks like most of you have this right. The recent IPCC report, IPCC is the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, just told us that climate change, there's 100% guarantee that climate change is being caused by humans. And I would say over nearly 100%, close to over 97% of scientists agree that climate change is real and caused by humans. And it's really, really important for folks to understand that, because there's a lot of misinformation out there. But we wanted to make sure that people understand why this is so critical. And I'll get to that in the next few slides. Oops, let me clear the screen and move on. All right, the next question. In the Paris Agreement, if any of you are familiar with the Paris Agreement, where over 140 countries came together to agree to collectively collaborate on climate change, which of the following did they do to keep global temperature rise well below 2 degrees Celsius or 3.6 degrees Fahrenheit? To achieve an overall balance between greenhouse gas production with those taken out of the atmosphere through absorption by trees, soil, oceans, and other means? Or for rich countries to help poorer nations by providing climate finance to adapt to climate change and switch to renewable energy? All right, so this is actually a trick question. The answer is all of the above. The Paris Agreement was a critical agreement amongst over 140 countries around the world that have agreed to keep global temperatures below 2 degrees, have an overall balance of what greenhouse gases are produced with those that are taken out, and for rich countries to help poorer nations. So with that, we're going to move on to the next set of our slides. So climate change in charts, we're going to go through that real quick. If you look here on the left, this is CO2 parts per million on the y-axis, thousands of years, and then thousands of years before today on the x-axis. And CO2, carbon dioxide, is a heat-trapping gas. It's released from human activities such as deforestation or burning of fossil fuels, as well as natural processes such as volcanic eruptions. So if you're looking closely at this graph, what do you notice? And maybe you can type in the chat. A lot of people are saying CO2 emissions are highest now. Most has happened post-industrialization, dramatic increase. Absolutely. All those things are correct. It's cyclic, but jumped significantly. So I think the first thing you notice is that Earth does have a natural cycle of high and low CO2 levels over millennia. But we are experiencing the highest level of atmospheric CO2 ever recorded, and no doubt caused by human activity, because of industrialization. Current CO2 levels, approximately 418 parts per million, are nearly double that of a normal level, even at its peak. So as you can see, there's a lot of cause to be concerned. And so I'll ask you in this next question, this slide is to annotate using the text feature. What are some of the human activities that are contributing to climate change? You can either do it on chat or you can write using text directly on the screen. What are some of those human activities? What are we doing now that's causing it? Industry, drilling oil, food, automobiles, cars, electricity production, absolutely. Eating meat, absolutely. Transportation, building, agriculture, the dairy industry. Being materialistic. Those are all very, very accurate. Primarily, human activities, all these human activities are correct. The biggest, I would say, cause of global warming, climate change, greenhouse gas emissions is industrial activity and the burning of fossil fuels that has happened over the last, I would say, 100 years or so. And that includes coal, oil, natural gas, and all the things that we consume, we eat, we use, all requires energy to create, and all of that goes into the emissions that are created. So with that, we're gonna sort of take a pause from the annotations and non-fuel efficient vehicles, yes, and go on to the next set of next set of slides. So I'm going to show you a few more graphs here. One of the things that we're seeing is that humans are causing this rapid and widespread warming. What we're seeing is that global temperatures are rising fairly quickly. So if you can see this, this is looking at the year 2000 and before. And the margin where you're seeing that just in the last 100 to 200 years or so, we observed a significant increase in temperature. Right now, we're observed at 1.96 degrees Fahrenheit higher than what what the normal is. And on the right, what you're seeing is that extreme heat waves are becoming more and more common. So in the past, where extreme heat wave event would happen one time, we're currently experiencing that almost 5 times the norm. And what we're expecting is that as global warming levels increase and we can't, if we don't control those emissions, the heat waves are becoming more and more likely. So in a 1.5 degree world, you keep hearing this term 1.5 degrees or 2 degrees Celsius, a heat wave is 8.6 times more likely or 13.96 times more likely. And if you look further down at 7.2 degrees Fahrenheit or 4 degrees Celsius world, a heat wave is 40 times more likely. At that level, civilization is nearly impossible. Our life as we know it would no longer exist. That's why it's so critical that we take control of emissions and reduce emissions very rapidly over the next 10 years. This is a short video of temperature anomalies from 1980 to 2020. And I want you to just sort of look at it and tell me what you're seeing. all that red. As you noticed, sometime between 1970 to 2020, it started to get hotter and warmer. And when you look at this map, you can see that the areas that heat anomalies will impact us the most are sort of the poles, right? What we're going to experience is heat waves and increasing temperature anomalies at the extremes of our planet, in the North Pole and the South Pole. And what this is going to do is going to rapidly melt sea ice and lead to increasing sea rise levels and a host of other things. But this is effectively what is happening. Oops, let me pause that. And so climate change, what are those effects that we will see in our lives? One of the things that we'll see is, as you know, increasing temperatures. But some of the things that you might not have heard of: sea level rise by 1 to 8 feet by 2100, stronger and more intense hurricanes, more droughts, fires, heat waves. Some of those things we're already experiencing. We're going to be experiencing change in precipitation patterns, an ice-free Arctic, like I was saying, with the North and South poles increasing in temperature, a biodiversity collapse, and we'll talk about that a little bit, and then ocean acidification. So all these things, obviously, don't feel like they might impact everyday life, but they will impact our life. And we're already seeing it today, as I mentioned. We're going to see our mortality from extreme weather events. Last year, I was in Seattle during the worst heat wave that has hit the West Coast. So Washington, Oregon, and the western coast of Canada severely affected. A number of people died because people in those temperate regions don't always have AC. So we're going to see mortality from these extreme weather events. Disruptions in food supply. When precipitation patterns change, farmers can't predict when they need to sow their seed to be able to harvest a crop later in the year. And what that does is it really just, it makes certain regions that used to be they have the infrastructure for massive agriculture production no longer viable. And that will cause disruptions in food supply all around the world. We'll also see destruction of infrastructure as sea levels rise. Global supply chain challenges, which we're experiencing today due to the pandemic. A loss of raw materials for medicines, as an example, as biodiversity collapses. Widespread water shortages, as you've seen with issues in China or South Africa. And then climate refugees, as Vivekji was mentioning, when places become uninhabitable, people will be forced to move away. A lot of the border crises that we're seeing in the US at the moment, with people coming in from El Salvador, Venezuela, Honduras, are a direct result of climate change, because the livelihoods that people used to have are no longer viable. The farm, the small landowner farms that used to sustain those families are no longer viable. And so people are being forced to flee from their homes. And they don't, no one wants to leave their home, no one wants to leave their community unless they're really forced to. And so this is rapidly happening, and we're seeing it every single day. So a little bit about biodiversity. Some of you, most of us know that our planet is precious. Natural resources are precious. And when we experience biodiversity loss, I think one of the most tragic things that people think about when they think about climate change is all about carbon dioxide, greenhouse gas emissions. Why does it matter that a few animals and plants die? I think what the most important thing that people forget is that biodiversity and our land and oceans are a huge carbon sink. They sequester a tremendous amount of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere into the ground and into the oceans. And there's this web of biodiversity that is interconnected and interlinked. So as we do more deforestation for agriculture or oil, these are all things that are impacting not only climate change, but impacting tremendous amounts of biodiversity. And as a result, what we're experiencing is the sixth mass extinction event. And this will have tremendous impacts on greenhouse gas emissions as well. When we think about COVID-19 and what we're experiencing now, I think this graphic is just really powerful. You know, it's this wave of pending, you know, it feels like this huge wave that's about to crash on us. COVID-19 felt like a big deal. The oncoming recession felt like a big deal. I would say that climate change is even bigger, and biodiversity collapse is on top of that, because all of it is interconnected. All of the resources that we rely on, you know, over 1 billion people rely on fish to eat as a source of food. A lot of that will be gone if we don't address some of these big challenges. A little bit more about oceans and how climate change is a triple threat to our oceans. So our oceans, you know, cover 70% or more of landmass of the planet, and they are a huge carbon sink for the planet. What happens is, as we emit emissions through fossil fuel burning, deforestation, a lot of that carbon dioxide is released into our atmosphere. And over the years, the ocean has buffered us from the worst impacts of climate change. So, you know, industrialization has been happening for many, many years and decades. And so far, the ocean has been our biggest buffer. It has taken in carbon dioxide, so much carbon dioxide that what's happening is that the ocean levels are warming. There's less oxygen and there's more acidity. So when you hear about coral bleaching, this is a direct result of the ocean taking in so much carbon dioxide that its temperatures are rising and coral can no longer survive. And the acidity in the environment is also too high. So there's a number of things that happen with climate change and the threat to the ocean, whether it's sea level rise, bleaching, as I mentioned, toxic algae is becoming more frequent, habitats. So coral reefs are a huge habitat for enormous amount of marine animals, and those habitats are shrinking. The acidification is happening that also impacts those habitats and the marine animals that live there. And then they disrupt fisheries. All right. So as we go to the next slide, I want to try and get to, you know, the positives and what can be done. I think there are 4 big things that I think about when we think about addressing climate change. And the number one thing that we can do is decarbonize. We need to reduce our dependence on fossil fuel, coal, oil, and natural gas towards cleaner energy, nuclear, and renewables. We have to preserve nature and biodiversity. This is so important because forests, mangroves, corals are all natural carbon sequestration sinks, right? If we think about the bigger the forest, the healthier the forest, the better it is at sequestering carbon from the atmosphere into the soil or into the ocean. And so that's super important. We need to preserve the natural habitats. We need to make sure that they're not cut down. We have to advance carbon removal technologies. So I think one of the things we realize is that even if we stop emitting tomorrow and we preserve nature and biodiversity as it is today, that is still not enough to prevent the worst impacts of climate change. We have to advance carbon removal technologies to capture and lock away carbon out of the atmosphere, and we need to do it at scale and at a lower cost. Right now, there are some that exist, but it's just not where it needs to be. And then lastly, I think it's thinking about circular economy and reducing consumption. We need to move away from this sort of consumer-driven lifestyle, buy less, waste less, upcycle and recycle, and rethink the way that we live our life. Right now, everything goes through as in a linear cycle, right? Everything starts here, ends up in landfill. What we need to do is think about a circular economy where if it starts here, it eventually makes its way around and it gets reused, either for its parts, either for a different purpose, or it's or in some other way. And I think these are sort of really critical things that we need to be thinking about as a society when we think about addressing climate change. And I think one of the things I like to show people is that sort of what's happening right now with today's emissions, and what we sort of see as the worst case scenarios from today to 2100. The scenarios that we look at right now, if we're looking at this, our current policies expect us to be at about 4.5 degrees Fahrenheit of increased temperature. And where we need to really be is closer into this blue-green area, blue-green range, where we really rapidly reduce our emissions. And so I wouldn't say that there's an end point to where we can't necessarily do anything. I think the more we do, the lower our emissions will be. And the more we do now, the lower our emissions will be in the future. And I think if we can cut those emissions rapidly, the worst of those impacts can be avoidable. And as I showed you before, those impacts can be tremendously harmful and potentially make a society unlivable if we hit 7 degrees Fahrenheit, as an example. And there is still time. We have to act quickly and we have to act collectively. And so I know that one of the, every month as people attend these seminars and workshops, we want to give people some inspiration for what they can do tactically in their lives. And I know the action to implement for this session was around energy use. And so some of the sort of smaller things you can do, the things that you can incorporate habitually into your lives include, unplugging your devices and chargers, or using energy saver mode on your phones, using cold water for laundry and line dry. And then if you're inspired to do more, there are some things that I think you can do that can more significantly impact your own emissions. The first is exploring options to switch to renewable energy at home where possible. So in some geographies, for example, here in Massachusetts, I can choose where my energy supply comes from. I can choose that it comes from 100% renewable, or it just comes from a mix of coal, renewables, and other things. You can you can also think about installing solar panels if you have the resources, but you can also do green power purchasing through existing providers. And if you don't have those, if you don't have the resources to do it, again, switching your energy supply is actually not necessarily more expensive to be renewable than to be, the default. The second thing you think about is buying new appliances or upgrading your home, considering efficiency is part of that solution. So thinking about home appliances and how you can maximize efficiency, understanding what happens end of life, and then conducting a home energy audit. And if you have an older home, making sure that it has proper insulation, plugging air leaks, and installing energy efficient windows. Those are all just critical things, because all these things reduce energy use. And when you reduce your energy use, that means that there's less emissions from the burning of coal, natural gas, and so forth. So I don't think we're going to be, Vivek says we should just sell our homes and live in an ashram. I agree. I don't think we're going to necessarily have time for breakouts, but one of the things that we're going to do is we'd love for people to think about, some of these questions. And I think we'll stick to this first question here. What is your superpower and how can you use it to address climate change? So I'll ask folks to take a minute and think about that, because that is, I think, what's critical. One of the things I like to say as part of my job is, as we're thinking about empowering our people, how do we incorporate a sustainability lens into your job? And not every job is a sustainability job. I understand not every job is like that, but how can you, regardless of whether you're an IT professional, you're in human resources, you're at home, or you're leading a nonprofit, like how can you bring a sustainability lens into your job or your community work or at home? And as part of that, thinking about what is your superpower, because ultimately our strengths are what make us. So I'll ask people to share. All right, so I know we only have a few more minutes and I want to leave some time for questions. So there's some resources here that happy to, we'll share my slides that you can use later. And then I'll leave you with the parting thought, but also wanted to share my email if you would like to ask any questions or reach out to me afterwards. But last video.
Every day, we have the opportunity to make positive choices for our home. Because after all, home is where the heart is. By acting now, we'll help the planet to bloom and ensure our children's children will have a home too. Each and every day, we all have the shared responsibility of our climate crisis, and together, our decisions add up to become thousands, millions, billions of thoughtful choices. So let's lay to rest that one person isn't enough, because together, we can make an impact. We're not a single drop of water, but an entire ocean connected across the world. We are infinite. We are progress. We have the power to protect our home and keep it going.
So hopefully that leaves you with a little bit more of an optimistic tone than we started with. And with that, I know we only have a couple minutes left, so I apologize we went over, but if anyone has any big questions, I'm happy to take those if I have time.
Himali, I'm going to share a thought right now. How about I complete our workshop, and then if anyone has any questions, they can continue to stay on with you. Sure. And you can have that dialogue. Yes?
Yeah.
So that's me presuming that Himali has time post 10 o'clock. I've often shared when it comes to the study of Vedanta that the more you trust your guide, your map, etc., the more you can internalize how they live and what they teach. Yes, this is not a new message to anyone. I am proud, and I also feel it's practical, when our own community members, like Himali tonight, they have dedicated their lives in a professional sense towards the environment, so it becomes easier for us to trust what they're sharing. See how this works with Vedanta, and it also works with being an activist towards the environment. Many of you have been asking Himali for her email address and for the slide deck and the videos. Every one of us should be organizing our Chinmaya mission centers, because many of us are involved with Chinmaya mission. And if you're not, organizing your community towards such Prthvi Sevasanga. Chinmaya mission Niagara doesn't own anything relating to Prthvi Sevasanga. All we're doing is organizing ourselves and sharing these resources openly for every center, for every community. Is everyone clear about that? This should flow to your Balavihar classes, to your study groups, to your workplaces. So many of us have come across in our studies the theoretical idea of pralaya, when the whole world is covered in water. When will it happen? It will happen at the end of Kali Yuga. See how theoretical it is for us, but based on what we got to experience today, this may be in our lifetime. That the world will be covered in water. And if not in our lifetime, most definitely my children's lifetime, for some of you, your grandchildren's lifetime, yes? Now, since I'm making that connection, the one good point is then Bhagwan Kalki will be here soon too. To help us. My positioning on our environment is I am an optimist, but I feel we've passed the critical point of helping our environment. So what to do? As Puja Swami Chinmaya has taught us, do your best and leave the rest. What else can we do but do our best? And that's why I keep reminding everyone, our best means tan. Give your tan, practice the actions to implement every month. Man, that's the learning, the engaging, the supporting, the trust. And the dhan, there are people who are better at helping the environment than us. Our privilege is that we all have more resources than we need. So help those who are better at helping the environment through the different causes we're supporting. My final thought, today is day 1 of our workshop. We're going to continue to immerse ourselves in our Shastra on our environment. Tomorrow, the immersion will be in our Upanishad, what the Upanishad shares about our environment. Tuesday will be from the perspective of Bhagavad Gita. And Wednesday, from the perspective of Srimad Bhagavatam. So different perspectives on our environment. And what's so special about all of this is that we'll also be able to celebrate our first birthday of the year together. On Tuesday, March 1st, we will celebrate Bhagwan Shiva's birthday, which is really our own birthday. And he and his family are highly environmentally harmonious. All of their pets are supposed to be antagonistic towards each other, but they love each other. The tiger and the cow, yes. The peacock and this mouse, yes. So we will celebrate their birthday, our birthday, together. Please keep telling your centers and your communities about what's happening over the next 3 evenings. And I will be leading the next 3 evenings. Okay? Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Be safe, be sound, be serene, be happiness. And please stay and ask Himali, who's a trusted professional, any questions you have, any ideas you have about Tan Man Dhan in terms of climate change. Himali, you continue. Anyone who has questions, you can virtually put your hand up, or you can ask the question publicly or privately in the chat. Himali, here's the first question. Why did you choose the profession that you're engaged in right now?
Great question. I used to actually work in healthcare, and I really enjoyed it. But I actually, in 2014, as I mentioned, I became a scuba diver and fell in love with the ocean and the incredible marine life. If you've ever been scuba diving, or snorkeling, you have an idea of what I'm talking about. But as I did it more and more and read about it, what I was realizing was that we were experiencing this huge loss of life in our oceans and on land. And I really wanted to work on something that would not only, would impact, I think, would be able to address some of those challenges, whether that's through climate change or through biodiversity. And I also felt like, I want to live a life of purpose, and dedicate my life to purpose. And while felt like I was doing some of that in the healthcare space, what I felt like was that climate change is so much bigger, that if we can't solve climate change, all the issues around health inequity, around poverty, all of those things are going to get much worse. And so I just felt like this was sort of the biggest issue for all of us. And again, this is not about the planet. This is about people. The planet will survive. The planet has survived for billions of years. It will, it can withstand comets. Whether people survive is a big question. It looks like Prema has a question.
Hariom Himali and Hariom Vivekji and team, thank you so much for this really powerful session. My question is with respect to, you had shown a graph where it showed the rise in CO2 currently, which is really significant. But if you look at the trend across the many years, you'll see kind of a peak, and then there was a downward trend, and then it goes back up. It was almost like a cycle, right? Mm-hmm. So are there any lessons that we can take out from previous generations, decades, centuries ago, that we can implement now, right? That we can take into action that will help us, even a slight bit, in helping with our climate change. Thank you.
Thanks for that question. So the cycles that you were talking about are natural cycles of cooling and warming of the planet that are a result of a number of natural events, whether that is, the energy of the sun and the power, the heat of the sun, or it's the geothermal activity that's happening on the planet. And whatever that is, those are all things that are natural, and those natural cycles will continue. And as you saw, like that peak that we're experiencing now is just so much higher. It's two times as high. In terms of lessons to take from previous, again, the biggest thing that happened, I think that increased it and then decreased it again, was sequestration happens naturally, right? As long as what goes into the atmosphere can be absorbed. But when you put so much out there, which is what we're doing, it can no longer be absorbed. And so it does really just come down to reducing our emissions and protecting what there is currently that does sequester, so that we don't lose that as well. And that includes all of our forests, rainforests, includes any mangroves that we have, includes peat bogs, like those peat. I don't know if you guys have ever heard of peat bogs, but they're only 3% of the land mass of the planet, but they have huge carbon sequestration potential. And if you're a gardener like I am, you buy soil, and a lot of that soil has peat. And peat, where they get that is they drain peat bogs, and then they use that for commercial soils that we buy. And what that does is that all that carbon that was sequestered in those peat bogs then goes out into the atmosphere. And so I think, like, to just answer your question, we have to preserve what we have. And that's just so important. Rita, you have a question.
Hariom Himali, thank you so much. This was awesome. I had a question about like carbon offsets.
Yeah.
So, they say when you travel to purchase carbon offsets, how does that work? Like, how does me flying and then paying for that work?
Yeah, great question. I was going to have a slide on it, but then I knew I was already going to run over time, so I had so much to talk about. You can literally talk to me for 3 hours and I wouldn't run out of things to say. But you hear about carbon offsets, right? Carbon offsets are effectively saying, I'm going to do whatever activities I want, and I'm going to emit the carbon. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to pay someone else to emit less. And so when you purchase a carbon offset, those dollars go towards projects somewhere around the world to for a project that is either sequestering carbon, that's preventing carbon from going in the atmosphere. And so those projects can include, providing clean cook stoves in Africa. And, a lot of times people use coal. What they'll do is they'll go into rural areas and give them clean solar powered cook stoves, so that that reduces emissions. It could be for installing a renewable solar energy farm somewhere. It could be protecting a forest that was going to be cut down. The problem with offsets is that you don't actually reduce your emissions. What we should be doing is reducing our emissions. If and that's ultimately a question of, if you have to travel, absolutely. And it's really hard, even for me, to say no to travel. But that is actually one of the biggest things we can do, is not fly as much, or use more sustainable forms of transport, whether that's train, or go on a staycation, or go somewhere local, go to a park near you, rather than flying to a different part of the country or world. Because ultimately what we have to do is we have to reduce emissions, because offsetting is not enough and is not going to ultimately stop the emissions that we're about to emit from going into the atmosphere. So we have to reduce our own emissions and work on these projects that are going to, reduce those people, those communities' emissions as well. Hopefully I answered that question. Ravi.
Yeah, thanks, Himali. Thanks for a really wonderful educational presentation today. So this is, thinking about this a little bit more, right? You've got millions, billions of people coming out of poverty, getting into the middle class in parts of Asia, Africa. And that's all going to only put a higher stress on the environmental resources or natural resources, on our planet. So, I mean, I don't want to be sadistic about this, but are we just dealing the inevitable unless we make, is this just what progress brings along? Having some of these challenges that we have right now? Or do we really think that we have a way to reverse this?
If I'm understanding your question correctly, you're saying, is this inevitable, or can we reverse this?
Yes.
The optimist in me would tell you that we can reverse this. The extent to which we reverse is the big question, right? Like, how bad will it get? As I was showing in one of my graphs, right? We're already experiencing temperature rise. We've already experienced about a 1 degree Celsius increase in temperature rise. We're already there. What we're trying to do is limit it to 1.5 or max 2 degrees. Because once you hit 2 degrees Celsius, after that, the temperature extremes, the resulting weather events become unbearable in a lot of parts of the world, right? And so, yes, with industrialization, with all these emerging economies coming, and as their standard of life gets better in those regions, it is unfair for us to say, no, you cannot develop, you cannot go through the same processes that the United States, the Western world went through, right? We all went through industrialization. We all went through this process of using coal, burning gas, oil, to a point where we are now, where we're still emitting a lot of carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gas emissions, but we are starting to transition to renewable energy. But because we have the resources and the technology to do it, I think that's why in the Paris Agreement, one of the things that's so important is that wealthier nations provide the funds, the $100 billion, to developing countries to switch to renewable faster than we did, right? That's, I think, really important. And ultimately, to your question, like, is this inevitable, or can we reverse this? Is just a matter of how rapidly we do it. If we don't act fast enough, the temperature rise just continues, and more of the planet becomes uninhabitable. And as a result, we will see, and it might not be in our lifetime, right? It might not happen before 2060, 2070, 2080, where we really see the extreme events. but it will happen, and large parts of the world will become uninhabitable, which will create geopolitical chaos, disarray, and effectively a lot of the structures we have in place will no longer be effective because the vast number of people will not have basic access to food, water, shelter, right? The basic necessities. That's the challenge. How do we prevent that? Saurabh, I think you're next.
Hariom Himalaji, thanks for a really awesome presentation. I was curious, you mentioned a few things that can be done to be more sustainable and help fight climate change, like decarbonization and working towards a circular economy. So I was curious, what are the main barriers to those right now that we need to overcome, both like as individuals, but also as an economy and as a society?
Yeah, great question. So we've actually, I think, was at the beginning of the session talking about the movie Don't Look Up. I don't know if you've seen it.
Yeah.
But I think a lot of it just comes down to pure political will. If governments are interested, we can act very rapidly. We just put, the United States just put like $2 trillion into our economy to prevent a recession. $2 trillion. Can you imagine what you can do with $2 trillion if you were to dedicate that to climate change, dedicate that to clean energy infrastructure, dedicate it to, cleaning up our grid, advancing electric vehicles. It really all like comes down to political will. And it's really unfortunate that oil and gas has such tremendous lobbying power, and coal has such tremendous lobbying power that we cannot make that change fast enough, right? So as a number one thing, that we can do as individuals is vote for the right people and donate to the right causes. That's really important. Individually in your own lives, as I mentioned, if you have the resources, right? Think about your house and think about your assets. And so for instance, your house, as I mentioned, is your house run fully on electricity, or is it run on gas? Is your heating run on gas? Most homes are run on, like a furnace is run on natural gas. If you have an HVAC system with the furnace, it's usually run on natural gas, unless you've converted to 100% electric heat pump, like with mini split systems or ductless systems. The other thing you can think about is, just reducing your overall energy use by better insulation and home energy efficiency of upgrades like light bulbs and appliances. And then installing solar panels, like where are you getting your electricity? Having an electric vehicle. So again, all those things require money, require resources, and they're not necessarily cheap, right? Changing out your heating system could cost anywhere from $15,000 to $20,000 US dollars, or more. I don't know what it equates to in Canadian dollars, but it is definitely really expensive. For those who have the means, I really recommend you do it, and I recommend you talk to your friends and your families about it too. Nitya.
Hariom Himalaji, thanks for a wonderful presentation. So my question is, I personally understand my goals, like what I should do for me and my family. Can you give me some more clarity on what I should be doing with the community around me, like 3 goals or something? Like specifically, like as a Balavihar teacher, one of the things that we discussed in Superpower is becoming a vegan. And I cannot go and tell a kid, stop drinking milk from tomorrow. It's very hard to implement that. So, for kids, what are the 3 things that will make an impact now and later on in their life that I can easily implement and also educate and bring the community along? Thank you.
Yeah, sure. I'm really glad you brought up your superpower and what you're doing in the community with Biodiversity, because I'm glad that you pointed out, like that is your huge sphere of influence, right? You teach all of these kids, you can have an influence on how they think about climate change. And I think the number one thing you can do is educate them, right? Telling them that climate change is happening. What is climate change? What are the impacts? Educating them on that. And so I think whether that's like bringing in external speakers, taking them on field trips, taking them to the science museum, and really helping them get their mind around what's happening. That's super important because when you educate kids, you empower them to have a voice and to be able to speak to that, to their parents, to their friends, to their family members, right? Because the younger generation is really where it's at when it comes to climate change. Other things, again, I agree with you. You shouldn't necessarily tell them what they can do. Like, you can't tell them to go vegan, or you can't tell them to go vegetarian. I think what you can do is you can just show them show them what are the activities that we do as humans that cause climate change, right? And have them decide for themselves, because this is a big problem, and all of us feel personally responsible, but we also have lives to live, and we can't give up everything. We can't compromise, because you could spend your whole life compromising and living a super simple life, but then if everyone, the person next door is flying in a private jet, like none of that matters. And so I think having people kind of think about what they can do is really important, and helping them understand the urgency. Third, I'm not sure if I have a third for you, but I think for you personally, the more you can share this with your community, right? If it's Bollywood, it's great. If you're not part of, if you're not a Bollywood teacher, what can you do in your community? I recommend you try to get plugged in with your town and the municipal sort of activities and initiatives that are happening in your town, because the biggest change that we can make is at the local level. Obviously, like, government can step in and do big things, but that takes a lot of time. As you know, there's a lot of lobbying and money involved. But if you have a voice for part of your like city town halls, if you can get involved with your city or your town, that's actually really big. What is your city doing around climate? How are they preparing for the impacts for climate change? How are we thinking about being resilient? That's super important, and you can have a big impact there. Vinita.
I just wanted to ask you something. You mentioned that India and China contribute like tremendously towards, producing these gases. And I know, like in India, usually in the month of October, November is when they start burning all those fields, the crops, the leftover of the crops.
Mm-hmm.
And then you also mentioned that the governments, depending on what the government wants to do, whether they will take climate change seriously or not, or how they're going to apply the funds that are provided to them. Do you think India has a chance? Because we know so many people in India whose children are not able to play outside, and they're so asthmatic. And I mean, it's really sad to see that, people like us who grew up in Delhi and other areas, it was an open space where we could breathe freely. There was no, problem of sickness or anything. And now the same children, like, they're sitting under inside air-conditioned rooms throughout the summer because there's nowhere for them to go and play. Do you think India will ever change? Or I know it's a tough question because, we feel, because we are all Indians and we also want to do our part, and we hope that, India does change. But do you think anything will happen?
I mean, it's honestly, it really comes down to whether the world puts pressure on countries like India and China to to make changes, and not just pressure, but really provide them with the resources, right? Because India, again, it's a population where 400 million people live under $2 a day. There's a huge amount of poverty in India, and for large swaths of China as well. And so for them, developing is really important to lift people out of poverty, but at the cost of, putting more emissions. And what you're referring to is stubble burning, which is a huge problem when it comes to pollution. It obviously has carbon dioxide and other emissions as resulting as well. But primarily the problem there is air pollution because of the stubble burning. There are a number of solutions that I know of organizations that are working on that, whether it's, taking biomass, like the waste products of agriculture, and turning it into an energy. It's just not happening at a scale that's large enough. I think it's going to come down to, again, the pressure from outside and then political will internally. So if you can get the right people in office, unfortunately, I don't think Prime Minister Modi has been doing a great job around addressing the issue of climate. But if we can get the right people in office, then I think there's potential for change. But again, I'm optimistic. It's just
I think we are all optimistic because we want to see the world as a better place for everybody, not just ourselves. And since we believe in afterlife, when we come back, we want to be able to live in a better place.
Me too.
Yeah, but thanks for your time, and I really appreciate this session.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. So we will see you next month, the end of March. And please visit our website for frequent updates. We'll be posting our new article for March, and then we'll have an aim posted also. So thank you for joining. Hariom. Thank you, Himali.
Hariom.